What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Homie Hangout, where we help others move in excellence. The lazy interview, lazy boy, no jumper. A lot of people are offering their views on it. I think some are good. I think some are kind of some hot takes. I think lazy chose his words. Lazy boy chose his words very carefully in that interview, and I think he did an incredible job. And I would even say that there's some lessons that can be learned from how he navigated stuff and maybe can clarify some things, right? So Adam asked some questions that, of course, were intended to see if, oh, maybe we can get a little soundbite, right? And for the most part, Lazy Boy sidestepped those as he should, right? I think Adam also asked some questions that weren't really intended for that reason. They were the type of questions that most podcasters would ask most people that are from the streets. And Lazy Boy sidestepped those too, right? And again, I think very well done. So let me explain. In the beginning, Adam asked Lazy Boy about his tattoos. He has the L on his forehead. And we don't know what does it say inside of it. I think he said it says Latino, whatever. And Adam's like, oh, so is that your gang? And he's like, I ain't gonna get into all that. You know, if you know, you know. The reason for that is simple, and it's not just because oh the big homies are watching. That is an element of it, right? To be clear, anybody can do anything they want to do as long as you're willing to face the repercussions, whether good or bad, of your choices, right? So some things are just not wise to do if you want to live a certain lifestyle, right? But again, it's kind of on you. So the part of it is yes, people are watching. There's a certain standard that you're expected to uphold, and it can be difficult, right? There is the risk of politics in the sense of somebody hating. They don't like your sign. They don't like this. And so they're watching what you say with a fine tooth comb, hoping to find some little misstep in there where they can then blow that out of proportion and politic on you because they just don't like you. So you do have to be mindful of that, right? And that sort of hating and jealousy and backstabbing happens within every group, right? So it's not unique. But with some of those questions, the bigger issue is law enforcement, is court. And what I mean is this: if they ask a lazy boy a question about the hood thing, for one, if you're on probation or parole and you're like, oh yeah, that's my hood is ABC, right? You just violated, right? But also, if anybody else hanging out with you is on parole or probation, and you say on a podcast, yeah, for I'm from Whoopty Whoop and such and such. Well, now they look to that person, your homeboy that's standing next to you, that may not even be from your neighborhood. He's on parole. He's just supporting. You're bringing him around so that he can see, the sights and get a little taste of a life different than sitting in prison. His parole officer sees and is like, man, I got you on camera standing next to this guy, and this guy said on camera that they're a gang member. Therefore, you just violated your parole, and you can't tell me that you're not hanging out with a gang member because he said he's a gang member, right? So there's that risk. It is just not good. It's not necessary. You're not going on these podcasts when you're an entertainer and you're from Northern California. You're not there to promote your hood necessarily, your gang. The people who know you know. The people from your area know who you are. They know where you're from. The people that are really interested in that kind of stuff can figure it out. Um, you don't need to go on these civilian podcasts and highlight that because it can lead to actual consequences, right? You wind up catching a case, and then they hit you with a gang enhancement. You're like, man, I'm not a gang member. Maybe I used to be. I'm not a gang member anymore, right? I'm a rapper. Well, just last week on this podcast, you said that you were from such and such. So if I come on here, right, and I'm like, oh, Joe's from ABC neighborhood, right? Joe's a member of this criminal organization. Joe, whatever. You can't use that against Joe because it ain't Joe talking. It's me, right? Like I'm just some jackass on YouTube, right? As far as anybody's concerned. So Joe gets in trouble. The DA is not going to be like, hey, man, look, on the Homie Hangout, Rascal said, you're from such and such. It's hearsay. It's not admissible. It's not going to happen. There's no risk there. I'm not suggesting everybody get on here and say where everybody's from and all that. I do sometimes, and sometimes I don't. And oftentimes it has to do with, specific factors, but that's a whole nother story. Um, but for an individual in that lifestyle, that was smart. It was very smart to do. And I'm not saying, again, remember, I'm not saying it really doesn't matter what I say. What matters is what he said. And more importantly, what he didn't say. So I know folks from other groups and that kind of stuff oftentimes don't take that approach. It's quite the opposite, right? They're quick to identify where they're from, and that's fine. I'm not saying one way is right and one way is wrong, but in Northern California, especially if you're coming from a community that has had a revolving door to prison for generations, like pretty much everywhere in San Jose, um, you're just brought up different, right? It's a different culture when it comes to that sort of thing. Now, in your music or whatever, it's a different story, right? You can kind of argue to some level, like, oh, the music is entertainment, right? But anyways, I thought Lazy Boy did a great question with some of that stuff, and you seen BFD did an interview a while back on another podcast, and and he was asked like, hey man, where you from? Right off from Sacramento. What part of Sacramento? From the north. Oh, where exactly? Right? Sacramento's big. There's lots of areas up there. He's like, man, I ain't getting into all that. Um, and that's why, right? It's not that folks ain't proud of where they're from or anything else. It's just that's not an important part of the conversation because I'm not here to promote that I come from a certain neighborhood. I'm over here to promote my music or perhaps something bigger or whatever the case may be. Now, there was also the topic of Southsiders up north, right? And, there's Southsiders in San Jose. And I'm hearing kind of mixed reviews on that. Everybody knows that there's Southsiders in San Jose, right? Most people affiliated in San Jose are Northerners. Most people would sympathize with the North, but there is a chunk of Southsiders there. There's been a chunk of Southsiders there since the 80s, right? Is when I talked to Carlitos and he talked about getting off on Casa de Tropicana, that he was talking about the 80s there were Southsiders. You know what I mean? So they've been there. Are they taking over San Jose? No. Are they taking over Northern California? Of course not. But they're there, and acknowledging that they're there is not like some big step, right? I don't think somebody should be patted on the back for acknowledging the obvious. I know it sounds different than some of the folks in the comments, right? And some kind of the troll type stuff, which happens on all ends from people that claim to be from all different areas. So it's not unique. But the comments can get wild on a bunch of different channels, right? But if you ask somebody that's a level-headed person, whether they're in the mix or not, yeah, that's an honest answer, right? And so I would expect that answer. To say otherwise is to be full of shit. And and again, I feel like Lazy handled it very well and he was pretty sincere. This question about styles, right? Which is where things did kind of go and Adam had asked him like, oh, so you actually, I think Lazy actually volunteered it, but then Adam saw the lane and so kind of, well, let me just clarify that. And this is what you're saying, right? And he's like, yeah, in terms of Southsiders imitating the style of Northerners, right? And I'm hearing some of the stuff of, well, it's just, everybody's imitating the blacks and all this other stuff. There was more to it than fashion, right? Fashion is kind of the obvious, right? The style of dress. My 2 cents is this: in Southern California, so in Northern California, cats used to wear Dickies and Pendletons and hairnets and Stacy's and all that stuff too, right? It phased out of the Bay Area a little bit faster than it phased out of some other places in Northern California. For the most part, it's phased out. It's phased out for the most part in California, unless you're an older person, right? But youngsters ain't really coming up dressed like that, with rare exception, no matter where you're from. Um, that was also popular in Southern California with the blacks too, right? The blacks was wearing Dickies and Hush Puppies and Pendletons and all that stuff as well, right? So it's often talked about as like, oh, this is the Chicano style, this is the Mexican style, this is this. And there is some truth to that. but it also kind of permeated Southern California low income black and brown communities alike, right? And it was still common down there after it wasn't really too common in the Bay Area. Now, to be clear, South South San Jose, when I was growing up, San Jose wasn't even considered part of the Bay Area, right? Like San Jose was the one place where you could go and you would see a bunch of dudes with their pants pulled up to here and hairnets and South gay homes and there was a lot of violence, right? There was a lot of red on red. There was a lot of just beefing because it was the '90s and everybody was banging on everybody and anybody could get it. That's just how it went. So San Jose was actually kind of one of the last areas in the Bay to really hold fast to that style. And then I came home and it was like disco style, like everybody in the clubs, and I was like, wow, it's different, you know. But nonetheless, styles change and whatnot. There is a lot of people, myself included, who see that Southerner rappers, right, Southsider rappers, have slowly been adopting a style similar to what Northerners have been doing for a while, right? And you can say, oh, well, it's the Northerners got it from the blacks, and our Southsiders getting it from the blacks, and you can say that if you want to. There is more kind of intermingling between black and brown in Northern California, in the Bay Area, than there is in Southern California, right? And there has been for a long time. More of a comfort level between those communities. So yes, there is an exchange that happens, right? That probably happens faster than it does in Southern California. But there's also just a different style, no matter what race you are in the Bay. And I would include Sacramento and Stockton in that now too, right? Because there's some similarities. That's just a different style than Southern California style, period. Particularly LA style, So it, I don't know why folks are trying to make this something that's not. I guess it could be seen as a diss or whatever, but Bozo himself, if I remember right, he had turned around and said, "Bro, these Northerners are influencing our people in Southern California. They're not sticking to the script. They're not bald-headed cholos no more." And this Bozo talking, I'm gonna stick to that. I'm doing it the real South Side way, and we need to stop this Northerner influence over our people. That's a South Sider saying that. Whether folks agree with him or not, I don't. I'm just saying that's what he said, right? And I'm paraphrasing, but that's pretty much what he said. There are artists from Southern California who have said, "Yeah, man, I kind of rock with the folks in Northern California, their sound." That doesn't just mean Northaniels or Northerners. It's a different sound, right? Oh yeah, I kind of listen to artists from Northern California, black artists from Northern California, brown ones. They're not saying, "Oh, I want to be a Northaniel," right? They're just saying that sound. The Bay has had a different sound than LA for a long time, and that hasn't. That's not going to change, right? That's just the way it goes. So I don't feel like that was a very controversial statement. I understand why some people would get butthurt about it because some people are just dying to get butthurt about anything that happens in terms of North and South and any comparison or any commentary. Somebody wants to take offense to it and blow it out of proportion. I don't really think it was that big of a deal, right? Uh, so there's that part. Uh, what else was said? Oh, the would you ever do a song with a Southsider? Look, except for like Lefty saying at one point in time that he had this deep desire to do a song with a Southsider. I mean, with a Northerner, um, and that was declined. And then now he's on his F the North campaign, right? There hasn't been any artist from either side, right? That is really in the streets, or that is closely connected to those that are in the streets that has said, yes, I want to do this. There's not Southsider artists turning around like, yeah, bro, I'm gonna do a song with a Northerner. There's not Northerner artists that are turning around like, yeah, I'm gonna do a song with a Southsider. That should not have been breaking news. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. Look, there's an end to hostilities in prison. That goes how it goes. And that's gonna kind of run on its own little world and its own little system. I don't know how much more clear people from Northern California that are in the mix, right? This is not me declaring anything. It's a common sense observation. I don't know how much more clear folks could be in Northern California. There's no end to hostilities in the streets. It's not happening, right? It's folks are gangbanging. Gangbangers are gangbanging. Big shock, right? So cats in Southern California have repeatedly said, I ain't doing no music with those dudes. Like, is there a different viewpoint? I think for some folks from Northern California, when they think of Southsiders from Southern California, yes. Because in the minds of some, Southsiders from Southern California make more sense than Southsiders from Northern California. So doesn't mean they're homies and they're gonna kick it and hang out and all this other stuff, right? In the streets. But it's more like, oh, you're from LA and you claim LA. Okay, that's cool. Like, I'm not from LA. I got nothing to do with LA. I'm from, San Francisco. And I rep San Francisco. So this shouldn't be controversial, right? This is kind of common sense. They view it differently when it's like, hey, fool, I'm from San Francisco, and here's a South Side that's also from San Francisco. It's a different view. Obviously, they're going to fight more because they're both right there than they are people from Southern California. So, but still, there is a north-south divide, right? And I'm not trying to manifest that. I'm not trying to encourage that. I have said a million times on here and will continue to say, I'm all for anything that reduces violence. I think it makes sense for folks to be proud of where they're from, wherever that may be. I don't think that means that you need to hurt someone else because they're from somewhere different. I think that as a community, we would do better. We, meaning everybody up and down the state, would do better to get away from that, right? Um, the reality is there are people that don't agree, right? And they tend to be younger and they tend to be in the streets and they're doing what they do. And it is what it is. And they exist on all sides and all teams and all colors and all numbers and all hairstyles and all everything else, right? So him saying he's not gonna do it, they know Southside's gonna do a song with him. And like I said, vice versa. And I don't know why people keep asking, to be quite honest, right? Is sure you have Goto, he's a businessman. And he's made some business moves, and that's great. And you got Conejo and Little White, you got different people that have done business with Gotos, and that's cool. Shout out Goto, great businessman, right? He ain't speaking for folks that's in the streets. He never has. He's not gonna start now. That's not a diss on him. I'm not putting him down. I hope nobody takes it that way. He's an older dude that's been in business for a long time. He's gonna stay in business. He knows how to make money. He knows how to push music, and he's not tripping. He will push your music if you want him to, and if he feels like you got a good sound, and he doesn't discriminate. He's the minority, right? Like in terms of entertainment, these rappers ain't going for it, and these rappers have made more influence on the streets than older cats or dudes in prison or YouTubers or anybody else. So that's not going to change, and and I think we would do good to kind of just even get away from asking. If somebody decides they want to do a song with the other side, people will find out and people will know. But everybody has their own fan base. Everybody has their own thing going on. Uh, and I don't personally see a problem with it, right? Because I'm not saying, oh, I'm gonna go whack this dude. He's just saying I'm gonna do music with him. That's they're different. I don't want to do music with them. Okay, fine. It, so what? I don't think it's a big deal, right? I think more have made it of it than anything. But this end of hostilities exists in the California prison system. It doesn't exist anywhere else, right? And for sure, not in the streets. Maybe do we get there someday? Maybe. I don't see it happening anytime soon. I don't see there being a real appetite for it in any direction. It is what it is. So Anyways, I think Lazy Boy did a great job. I think he represented himself well. Clearly, he was nervous. He posted on social media before the interview even aired. I was nervous to do the interview. If you hear the dude talk, because people are like, oh, he was hiding his face and this and that, it's just childish observations. Again, people looking for any reason to talk shit about somebody else. Um, he said on there, like, hey, I've been asked to be on a ton of platforms. I told all of them no. See, he didn't go on Vlad TV, which is a much bigger platform than No Jumper. He said, because I always said I'm gonna do No Jumper first, right? And then I'll do other ones. So that was his dream podcast to do, right? Essentially, that's my interpretation of what he said. And now here's his chance to do it. That's intimidating. That's nervous. There's butterflies. He's not seasoned at doing interviews. I think he did incredibly well, given that that's not something he does all the time. I think he made himself and the folks that are interested in how he presents himself, I think he made everybody look good, to be quite honest. It wasn't sensational. I don't know that that was a great commercial for having other Northern artists places. But the reality, I've seen in some of the comments, like, oh man, they need to get a Northerner that's like Lefty Gunplay to go on there and just say whatever. You're not going to find that. If you find somebody who says they're a Northerner and they go on a podcast and they talk even remotely close to how Lefty Gunplay talks, they're not going to be a Northerner anymore. Maybe in their own mind, but their career is over. They're not music with anybody. It's just not going to happen. That type of behavior is not acceptable, right? Again, you can do it, but there's going to be a consequence, and that consequence is going to have an adverse impact on your career. So that's just not going to happen. There are Northerners like that. Don't get me wrong, but they're not going to go on a podcast and talk that way, right? Just like there's plenty of Southsiders who don't talk like Lefty Gunplay. They're just Southsiders, So, anyways, I thought it was a good interview, man. That's kind of my feedback on it. People have been asking. I see a lot of people, did videos about it. If you haven't seen it, no matter where you're from or whatever, I suggest you go check it out. And again, Lazy Boy put a little game in there, for folks to kind of watch and maybe learn something from it. So, anyways, help others move in excellence. That's what homies do. Help yourself at the same time because you're worth it. Help your community, and I'll tap in with you guys on the next one.